Bonjour et nous reprenons.
Welcome. We are resuming our public meeting on the contract awarded to PSRVC. I would like to introduce our first group of witnesses.
Lieutenant-colonel retired Simon Parker, Dr. Lynn Saint-Pierre, psychologue, and Director Medical Corporation, Mr. Aaron North, CEO and Director General by video conference. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Afterwards, we will proceed to a series of questions with the members of the committee. Lieutenant-colonel Parker, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Chair, Vice Chairs, honourable members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to share my experiences with all of you. To provide some context, I'm a Canadian Forces veteran and an infantry officer with over 26 years of service. For 26 years, I faithfully served my country loyally and executed all tasks that were required of me, including operational service both at home and abroad. Like many thousands of serving members and veterans, I turned to Veterans Affairs when I needed support in rebuilding my life after military service. I'm here today not as a policy expert or a procurement specialist. I'm not a political advocate. I'm here as a veteran directly impacted by the PCVRS contract and the rehabilitation system that it administers. In my case, I was placed on the rehabilitation program twice and removed from it twice unwillingly. During that time, I had 3 case managers and 2 PCVRS rehabilitation service specialists. So I have some knowledge and experience with the program, its delivery, and the consequences. To begin with a simple point, this study that you are conducting is not about a contract. It's much more. It's about trust, accountability, power, and harm. And so as you work through your study, please keep those 4 things in mind: trust, accountability, power, and harm. Because when rehabilitation services fail veterans, the consequences are deeply personal, long-lasting, and often invisible to those outside the system. And I say this plainly: veterans have nowhere else to go. We don't. Currently, there's no other organization or entity in Canada, private or public, that provides the same or equivalent services and support that Veterans Affairs Canada does. Unless veterans are able to pay significant out-of-cost pockets to various private entities, VAC is effectively the only option we have. Simply put, as a veteran, you either work through VAC or you go without and you suffer. This creates what I would describe a form of managed care captivity. Veterans like myself, in effect, become managed care captivity, and captive patients. And as you know, the concept of captive patient describes the helplessness, the alienation experienced when people are denied meaningful choice in treatment pathways, providers, or systems of care. Over time, repeated exposure to rigid bureaucratic systems can produce what psychologists call learned helplessness, the gradual erosion of agency, confidence, and the belief that one's actions can meaningfully improve the outcome. When veterans are financially dependent, medically dependent, psychologically vulnerable, and have nowhere else to turn, rehabilitation stops being collaborative and starts to feel coercive. Veterans come to VAC already vulnerable in pain. Many are coping with operational trauma, chronic pain, psychological injuries, family breakdown, moral injury, loss of identity, difficulty transitioning from military service, and much, much more. They arrive seeking help from an institution they believe exists to support their recovery and restore dignity. Instead, many, like myself, encounter a system that appears fragmented, transactional, and disconnected from military reality. For me and many others I've spoken with, this becomes what clinicians call sanctuary trauma, and I know you've discussed this term here in this group. As committee members have heard from previous testimony, sanctuary trauma occurs when an institution expected to provide care, healing, and recovery instead becomes a source of distress, invalidation, fear, and harm. Veterans come to VAC seeking rehabilitation and support, yet many experience repeated retelling of traumatic histories, inconsistent care, dismissive interactions, poor continuity, and systems that appear more focused on compliance and administrative processes than recovering outcomes. And I've experienced all of these. At the center of this experience is what I believe to be the profound cultural blindness. Military service is not simply another profession. The military has its own culture, language, ethos of service before self, traditions, shared experiences that distinguish it from the society it protects. Military service shapes identity, trust, communication, leadership, coping mechanisms, relationships, and even how injuries are reported, experienced, concealed, or disclosed. Many veterans are not simply civilians with employment barriers or health problems that can be treated and administered by civilian-like insurance programs. To help veterans, one must understand the culture because military culture matters, operational service matters, and the trauma within military environments matters most. Yet too often, veterans interact with systems and administrators who appear to lack meaningful understanding of the military culture, and this is cultural blindness. And it has consequences. It affects credibility assessments, communication, expectations of behavior, and it affects rehabilitation decisions. When we feel misunderstood, pathologized, or judged rather than understood or even respected, that trust deteriorates rapidly. But cultural blindness alone is not the greatest concern. The committee must also examine the power imbalance and authority. In theory, rehabilitation is supposed to be collaborative. Indeed, FAC and PVCRS frequently describe the rehabilitation program that way. They depict collaboration prominently in their materials, but veterans feel far removed from that. In practice, veterans often experience a profound imbalance of authority between themselves, the case manager, and the RSS. And I experienced this. As I'm running out of time, I will end now. I believe most of you have my opening comments, so if you have questions about anything in there, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Colonel Parker. Pour 5 minutes, Dr.
For 5 minutes, Dr. Saint-Pierre. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to committee members. My name is Lynn Saint-Pierre. I'm a psychologist in a private practice in the Ottawa area, and a significant portion of my clientele consists of veterans. Before starting my clinical practice, I worked at the Department of National Defense, and that gave me early exposure to military culture and the realities faced by service members and their families. I am also an affiliated provider with the PCVRS program. I stand before you today as a clinician who meets with veterans every week and who sees firsthand the impact of this system on their recovery. One of the most striking observations I have made in my clinical practice is a regression in therapeutic progress and an intensification of psychological distress and symptoms related to injuries or trauma among the majority of veterans in the program. I have also observed an improvement in their condition once they leave the program, so this is a pattern that is difficult to ignore. In my opinion, a significant part of the problem lies in the fact that the program structure is not always sufficiently aligned with the psychological and cultural realities of veterans suffering from trauma or operational injuries. And many veterans have dedicated their lives to the Canadian Armed Forces, and they are seeing their discharge as a profound institutional abandonment. This is known as sanctuary trauma. Many veterans enter the PCVRS system with a deep mistrust of institutions. Unfortunately, certain aspects of the program often tend to reinforce this mistrust rather than address it. Many veterans report feeling as though they are being managed rather than supported. They felt like it's checking the marks. It's very difficult for them. It's difficult for them to trust and to feel safe when they have to discuss their condition with their rehabilitation specialist. Yet recovery from trauma depends on a sense of safety, trust, and the ability to let down one's guard. Many experience certain aspects of the rehabilitation process as triggers that reactivate their alarm system, which is incompatible with recovery. I have also observed that frequent reassessments and progress reports can become highly triggering and sometimes even re-traumatizing for many veterans. I understand the importance of accountability and tracking progress. However, the program does not always seem to sufficiently account for the fact that severe psychological injuries often heal very slowly and the progress is also done in a non-linear manner. In addition to having to regularly revisit their conditions, veterans are also subjected to rating systems that assess their progress in treatment. For veterans who have been trained for years to perform and meet expectations, being confronted for long periods of time with ratings indicating little progress or can unintentionally reinforce their feeling of shame, a sense of failure, and despair. Another concern is the emphasis on employability, sometimes before sufficient psychological stabilization has been achieved. For many veterans with significant trauma, this led to a significant increase in anxiety, perceived pressure, and psychological distress. I have also observed that certain clinical recommendations aimed at avoiding vocational assessments deemed too destabilizing were not always followed, despite the risk of significant distress for some veterans. Because of all of this, many sessions are spent dealing with this distress that is caused by the rehabilitation process instead of focusing on therapy and rehabilitation. I invite the committee to examine whether the structure of the rehabilitation system is psychologically aligned with realities and military culture. Thank you, and I would be pleased to answer your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Saint-Pierre.
Mr. Nort, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. My name's Aaron North, and I'm the President and CEO of Vector Medical Corporation. I've worked in mental health services for nearly 22 years. I co-founded Vector Medical in 2013 with 2 physicians. Our work was initially focused on medical and mental health assessments related to fitness for duty, return to work, and treatment planning. In 2015, we welcomed a new physician partner to our board of directors who had served in the Canadian Armed Forces as an aviator, medic, and flight surgeon. His lived experience and perspective has helped shape our leadership's understanding of military culture and our work with the veteran population. Vector began working with veterans rehabilitation in 2017 as an affiliate provider of the CVVRS program, primarily in the vocational rehabilitation stream. When PCVRS was introduced, it brought together services that had previously been siloed across vocational, medical, and mental health streams. It also created a clearer pathway for standardized assessments, functional goals, outcome measurement, and treatment tracking progress. As an affiliate clinic of the PCVRS program, Vector does not set the design or strategic vision of the program, but our experience in both CVVRS and PCVRS gives us a unique perspective on how the model works and continues to evolve to meet the needs of veterans. Since January 2023, Vector has completed 1,908 PCVRS assessments, mostly psychological and mental health related. In July 2024, following an assessor safety incident, we introduced a mandatory post-assessment feedback form. This helps us identify participant distress, suicide risk, disengagement, frustration, and assessor safety concerns, which are immediately escalated to our clinical leadership. The combined feedback data reviewed shows that approximately 95.5% of records had no notable concerns identified by the assessor. Approximately 4.5% did raise a concern, and those concerns are significant. The concerns were patterned, however. There was frustration over repeated assessments, complex questionnaires, and retelling difficult military experiences, as well as uncertainty, guardedness, distrust, and anxiety related to benefits or income replacement. The records also show that approximately 85% of assessments were completed within 3 hours. And among the 4.5% of feedback forms that contained participant concerns, the average assessment length was not longer than the forms that gave feedback with no concerns. The Director of Psychological Services for Quebec describes the key to good assessments very simply. Come prepared. Review the background information provided by RSSs. understand what the veteran has already told other providers, and show them that the work that they've already completed is meaningful and will serve as the foundation for planning the next stage in their rehabilitation journey. This insight matters because it reflects how Vector collaborates with PCVRS clinical and administrative leadership. When our assessors identify practical improvements to report templates, referral document packages, process flow, or other critical items for assessment success, we bring those to PCVRS. And our recommendations are met with openness, and our leadership has ongoing opportunities for follow-up discussions on those matters. Most importantly, we've seen examples of our suggestions being included in system-wide innovations that improve participant experience. Vector is also responsive to feedback from PCVRS, and we implement improvements to our processes and program quality whenever necessary. Continuity of care is one of the most important issues raised at this committee about the program. In May 2025, Vector began an audit that sampled 211 psychological assessment records, namely reports. Nearly half of the treatment pathways recommended in the reports involved participant requests for continuing with or being recommended to continue with a current or previous treatment provider. Where additional supports were recommended, they often supplemented the existing relationship with that previous provider rather than replacing it. One of the most important improvements now being introduced is interdisciplinary mental health assessments and treatment. In complex cases, for example, a physician, psychologist, and occupational therapist are brought together around the same participant with the goal of completing all three assessment components sequentially, approximately within 4 hours.
Mr. North, I apologize sincerely. I forgot to mention that I am the timekeeper here at this wonderful role that I have the privilege of chairing, but I have to interrupt you, sir, and I know that there'll be most likely lots of questions coming to you in our first round. So thank you very much, Mr. North. So this will open our first round. We will have Mr. Tomey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. And I thank you for your service and for your care for the veterans that come to your clinics and your seeking help. So I do have a few questions that I'd like to ask, and I'm going to try and get through each witness here. And I'd like to start with yourself, Lieutenant Colonel Parker. You brought out a few terms, and I'm some that I'm familiar with, and then one that you've brought in that I'd like to kind of peel apart a little bit, and just kind of, because it seems like you're adding something to kind of the trauma that veterans are suffering. So you said that you wanted to talk about trust, accountability, power, and harm, and that's what we're here for. We're here for the veterans. You mentioned sanctuary trauma, you mentioned institutional harm, and then you came up with a new term that I would say for myself is care captivity. Is that the term that you used? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try and define these so that they're not the same and that they're individual items. So sanctuary trauma, in our understanding, is when the government betrays its responsibility to care for veterans. That's the way that I would define it. Institutional harm is when a vet has to ask 300 questions and then is put back into trauma that they're suffering because either they're feeling like they're questioned about their honesty or they're being drawn back into the trauma. And care captivity, my understanding is that if you don't use Veterans Affairs, you don't get the care. So you have to go through whatever program they have. Would you say that that's fair definitions for this?
Within the time that we have, yes. If you want to have a separate discussion, we probably could go on a lot more. But care captivity is captive patient. It's not a term I've invented, but certainly you are there's a power imbalance. When you think about power dynamics, the case manager and the RSS, they hold the keys to the kingdom. And if you don't conform, they can kick you out, they can deny services, and they can hold back, and which has happened in my case a couple of times, that they will actually collaborate in some instances to have you removed from the program just because you won't conform to what they want you to do.
So I'd like to touch on that because you brought that up in your testimony that you were placed on PCVRS, removed, then replaced on it. And then were you removed again, or and why were you removed from it? Like, you don't seem a rebel to me.
Yes, no. The rehabilitation program, not PVCRS is part of, they coordinate, as you know. So it was the rehabilitation program. So the first time I was removed, it was simply because the case manager decided that she wanted something from one of my care providers, couldn't get it, tried to escalate the situation with me, made me responsible for it, and then eventually decided enough is enough. You're being removed from the program and she used language from the Act that said you failed to participate as you should have, and the VAC did an investigation and found out no, she couldn't have done this. She wasn't supposed to do this. They put me back on the program about a month later, gave me a new case manager, a new RSS, and those two basically collaborated to remove me from the program within 6 to 8 months. They waited for an opportunity. They found one. And it happened to be around an out-of-service provider. And this is important, out-of-service. You've probably talked about this before, but there's in-service and out-of-service providers. Out-of-service providers are not given the same materials that in-service providers are. In-service providers are ones that decide to sign on to PVCRS program. Out-of-service do not get access to the portals. They do not get briefings on the reports, the timings of when the reports are supposed to come in, how to submit those reports. And so I had a care provider out of service, didn't know this, missed a report date, and then the RSS decided to let it slide for 30 days without doing anything about it, and then ended the service.
So unfair treatment. Okay. How much time do I have, Chair?
59 seconds.
59 seconds? Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, great. Then Dr. St. Pierre, I have a constituent who's a vet who is dealing with PTSD. And one of the biggest complaints he has had is that he has a relationship with his care provider, then PCVRS has come along and said, no, you can't use that. You have to use one of ours. And then he's re-traumatized, and he's fought so hard because he feels like he's getting so much work done with his care provider. And you've talked about regression within the program. Could you share a little bit about that before we lose time?
Yes. Oh, my God. First of all, that's unethical. Not accepting the provider, that is unethical. Okay.
Okay. That's all I needed.
Yes, it's unethical.
For 6 minutes, Mrs. Hurdle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Dr. St. Pierre, I'd like to address my questions to you, please. Based on your combined experience in government and clinical practice, what observations would you offer regarding the continuation of care during transition?
Are you talking about the transition center?
Well, transition from active duty to...
It's a very long road. It's a very, very difficult transition, even for veterans or members who were actually looking forward to get out. So we're not released medically, but the transition is very hard. We have to understand that many of these, they grew up in the military. Their whole identity is the military. And a lot of them have gone to war zone. A lot of them, compared to... And coming back to civil world is extremely difficult.
Thank you. So you're saying then, are there challenges around coming from such a structured organization, such as CAF, into more community-based care where it's not as structured?
Well, life itself becomes very difficult for them because they've been told since they're like 17, 18, how to dress, where to go, what time to be there. They've been handheld, not that they're not, they're very functional, but it's very different reality. And I think that's why it hits so hard when they feel I've left the military and now I'm on my own. The organization's not there for me. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but.
Oh, that's sufficient. Thank you. From a clinical perspective, then, what supports engagement in mental health care among veterans and serving members? How do you build trust to shape willingness for them to engage? Through
me and through Therapeutic Alliance, validation, building a rapport, like building the trust before we actually start doing anything. And that sometimes can take a long time, which PCVRS, I don't think, understands sometimes that it will take a while before we're actually starting to deal with the trauma. We have to help this person maybe just get out of bed. And before we get there, I have to build trust with this person. And sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes a long time.
Thank you. Having gone through therapy myself after my partner's sudden death 7 years ago, I can appreciate a bit of what that looks like. You mentioned Therapeutic Alliance. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yes. It's creating the space for the veteran to feel at ease, to feel that with me in the space that we create, it's a safe environment, that there's no judgment, that I'm there for that individual, and there's no pressure. I don't put any pressure. I'm trying to build where they could feel truly themselves and not be on guard, because sometimes veterans will be on guard with a civilian therapist because they think, well, we don't speak the same language, she won't understand me. But we get over that with the Therapeutic Alliance.
That's interesting. Thank you very much. So based on your clinical and assessment work, what have you observed about how veterans and serving members access the psychological care?
Well, through word of mouth. Often, what I've heard is they didn't know. They didn't know they could even go to VAC for help. And you think by now people would know. We're way past Bosnia. But it's still the case. And it's often through word of mouth. Was that? I'm not sure if I'm saying the right.
Yeah, no, that's correct. We understand. Thank you. Okay. So what aspects of the system appear to help individuals access care more easily? What's working?
I think VAC, getting a case manager, case managers, I've always had good experience with them, which is, I'm going to use my time to say this. It's a shame that before, with the older program, we had direct access to VAC case managers, and we don't anymore. We have access to the PCVRS RSS. And it's something that's missing. It was highly valued because in the end, the VAC case manager has the power, has the decisional, which most of veterans don't know. I instruct them on this. Yeah. But yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Tel qu'indiqué, Madame Gaudreau.
Ms. Gaudreau is going to be asking her questions in French, so please ensure that you have interpretation is selected so that you are able to hear questions in English. I'm hoping that everyone is hearing interpretation.
Si moi je parle français,
If I'm speaking French, you're hearing the interpretation in English.
second, we're just going to make sure. Non, c'est bien. Je veux juste pas prendre le temps pour Mme Gaudreau. Je veux faire certain.
I just want to be sure that we'll be able to. We want to hear from our witnesses, and I want to be sure that you're hearing interpretation in the language of your choice. So I'm going to continue speaking to ensure that you are able to hear me. I see that you're hearing me now. So for Ms. Gaudreau, Ms. Gaudreau has 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to start by saying that your testimony is very important. We're at a crossroads and we want to talk about potentially renewing this contract with PCVRS. And this study could allow us to make corrections where necessary. And so thank you. I'll start with Dr. Saint-Pierre. There have been many witnesses who have talked about a system that has an administrative structure that is not very well adapted on the clinical side. You've said that some veterans are regressing instead of getting better, and I find that unfortunate. Is this a functional challenge, or is it the rehabilitation model that needs to be changed fundamentally? I have worked with veterans and I have seen the transition. So they were in the rehabilitation program with Blue Cross, and then there was the switch to PCVRS. There's always a transition. So as soon as there's change, regardless of the change, we can expect an increase in distress for veterans. That's natural with any kind of change. But we realized very quickly that there are a lot of issues regarding how PCVRS functions. The program is often focused on performance, and it implements this on people who are not, or who are very traumatized. And many witnesses have talked about these evaluation criteria, these assessments, and you mentioned it as well. When veterans lose trust in their institutions, when they need to demonstrate their progress constantly, could this not make their symptoms worse? What do you think, Colonel Parker? Yes, of course.
In my case, that happened many times where as you progress through just the interactions alone with the staff members, because they didn't understand the military culture, frequently you'd get into disputes with them over treatment. Your goals were not what their goals were. They would talk about a plan, but I never saw the plan. In fact, I had to ask them one day, can I get a copy of the plan? They said, oh, it's in the PVCS portal. I said, I'm looking at it. It's not there. Then they said, oh, it must be an IT problem, and then one appeared. So there are all these functional problems with the organization because it functions more like a civilian insurance company dealing with slip and fall at work. They don't understand what we go through. They don't understand how to communicate with us. We have our own separate language. We have our own separate needs. We have our own separate requirements. And as we heard earlier, we don't transition well out of our system that we have been developed inside and operated inside. And then as we move into this world and we're now engaged with a civilian insurance company, the two don't meet. So there's no collaboration, there's no partnership. We are not at the center of their work. We are peripheral. And in my last case, I actually was at odds. It felt like a wrestling match where they were tag team partners and I was alone in conflict with them. And when you go through that and you're looking for help from them, you regress, you get triggered, you suffer more trauma, you go home and you don't get up out of bed the next day because you just feel overwhelmed with everything that they've done. And you've put your trust in them to help you navigate through the system, and it's not repaid.
Ce que je comprends dans le fond, c'est que
So they are hoping to offer quality services, but people are saying that this isn't working, and so perhaps the contract should be given to someone else. I understand having a therapeutic alliance and having to work with these case managers, but I'm hearing what you're saying, and I have a question regarding bureaucracy. Did the organization reach out to you and ask you questions regarding your experience? Because we've heard talk that they were doing that. Have they contacted you? I don't believe so. I don't think I was surveyed. No. And before I became affiliated with the program, I looked at not the MOU with Veterans Affairs, but the MOU that was given to me, and I had indicated to the people in charge that it was not reasonable. Thank you very much, Ms. Gaudreau.
Our second round with Mrs. Wagenthal for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. Mr. Simon Parker, you're a bit of an oxymoron, because on the one hand, you are very, very articulate about the challenges of coming out of service, and then I see words like commanding officer. You obviously have huge responsibilities with other people, and yet when you're coming out, what I'm seeing here is the majority of the stress in what you're experiencing is due to the system and the sanctuary trauma of trying to deal with your other issues. Is that correct?
I would say it encompasses all four of those aspects: this captive patient, the sanctuary trauma, the cultural blindness. It's all part of it.
I appreciate that. I guess I'm just trying to think through the dynamics of being in command of other members and what that takes, and then you're made to feel like you don't really know what you need when you come out of service. Would that be accurate?
Right. It's we were speaking out in the hallway, and I used the example, a child's toy where you have different shaped holes, and the child is given different shaped objects, and they have to put the right shape in the right hole. As a veteran, if you're not the right shape for that hole, you don't get. So yeah, you're out of the program, or you don't get the benefit, or you need to fit within the parameters that we're telling you. And in my case, because I refused to do that, so I refused to change service providers when I was told. I was labeled as volatile, I was labeled as difficult, and this became
okay.
Sorry.
Hear, no,
Yeah.
please, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is what we've heard a great deal in this study, is that these veterans had a system and a provider, but now all of a sudden, because of that, decides to do things differently. It has created a great deal of turbulence for those providers. And also, with having to go through a reassessment again, were you able to see the assessment and sign off on it, that you were given to become part of PCVRS's program?
No. The first time I was rolled over onto the program when it started, so I was one of probably in the beginning. So I was just told, your file's going over and that's it. And then eventually, when I was called by the RSS, I was just a conversation on the phone. The second time, the case manager said an RSS will contact you, and then, so there was no assessments, there was no sort of...
Well, there would have had to have been some kind of assessment by them to be able to move forward.
No. So this goes back to my comment about there's no plan. So in my case, in both situations, there was no assessment, there was no goals established that they're supposed to. It's all in the, if you go on the websites, it's all there. But there's no goals, there's no plan. None of the services are coordinated. They're all basically run independently.
I want to ask you a question. Was there nothing, or was there nothing shared with you as to what they were?
That's a good question, because nothing was ever shared with me. Okay. Now, I did say in phone calls, update phone calls that I would get with the two, the RSS and the case manager, they would literally have conversations with each other on the phone about changing this in the plan or updating that in the plan. I never saw it. I had no idea what it looked like.
Okay, thank you. That's very revealing and very disturbing. Thank you. Mr. Aaron North, you indicated something that I thought was really interesting. You said it was important to come prepared to assess. You're not talking about the veteran being prepared. You're talking about the assessor being prepared, having gone through everything the way that they should to be able to make that assessment that they're now doing as simple and as painless as possible. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and you are an affiliate provider? What does that mean? Are you one of...
Medical is
Sorry?
an affiliate clinic.
Sorry, say that again. I interrupted you.
No worries. We're an affiliate clinic.
Okay, so when they talk about out-of-service providers, that is something different?
Yes, as far as I know, we're not out of...
You're able to see all the reports and do everything. It sounds like out-of-service providers don't have access to what they really need to be able to do the job, that others are given preferential treatment into how they provide services. Oh, I might... Oh, 4 seconds, 5 seconds over.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. North and Ms. Wagenthal. What I will... 5 minutes for Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here this afternoon. Mr. North, I wanted to continue with you if I could, and I just wanted to make sure I had understood correctly what you said in your opening statement. So you said Vector Medical had done a little under 2,000 assessments since 2023, 1,908, I believe you said. And you talked about 95% of those assessments did not report any concerns, and 4.5% reported concerns. So could you just flesh that out? Who is reporting those concerns, and how do you classify those? And are all 1,900 of those assessments recorded in that way for concerns or not, or what sample of that group?
Sure. So the sample was about 1,000 of the assessments, and it's an ongoing. It's not an audit, it's an ongoing integrated part of the program. So we started the feedback forms after there was an incident with one of our assessors. And, it was a lot of the data that I've been able to glean has to just do with us having a clear understanding of what happens within the assessments. So the concerns that are raised they're not categorized, they're just the assessor will report back, was this experience essentially a positive experience for the participant?
And so what those assessments are coming back from the assessors and not necessarily the participants, or both?
It's not a participant feedback summary. It's an assessor evaluation of clinically how did this assessment go.
Okay. Do you collect any feedback from participants or any from that side of things?
Well, we address the concerns that are brought up by the assessors, and we do bring that up with the RSSs. Yeah.
And from a standpoint of improvement, I think obviously when you're dealing with programs of this scale and complexity across the country, it's always, really important to have continual improvement. So, Mr. North, you have a large sample size of assessments that have been done here, almost 2,000. From your point of view, what would be the one or two things that stand out to you as practical areas of improvement?
I would say making sure that the assessors that are doing the work really do understand the culture, really do understand the complexities of an assessment that's specifically geared towards, a population that experiences trauma, but also a population that has to deal with something that no one else really does, and which is that transition back to civilian life. So it's about cultural competency, absolutely. It's also about excellence in the work that they do. We have directors of psychological services for all of Canada as well as for Quebec, and we constantly review the process as well as the work that's actually being done by those assessors in our network.
Okay, great, thank you. And actually, if I could move to you now, Lieutenant Colonel Parker. Actually, Mr. North touched on a word that I wanted to ask you about. Actually, it was a good segue around culture. So in the previous round, you said, they don't understand. That was a quote from your group. So from you. So my question is, the problems that you've experienced, the problems that others may experience, how much of that do you think is perhaps the administration and the structure of the program, and how much of that is cultural, more intangible things that, from what the sense I got from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like that's a really important piece of it too. So how do you balance that out and make sure that both of those pieces are actually getting improved? Because if you don't do both, my feeling is you're not really getting where you need to get to.
Yeah, good questions. We could talk for hours on different models and different ideas. Mr. North mentioned something that they brought in a former military member to advise on culture. I think that's helpful. I think that if you have someone there, so when you're bringing in new employees, you're onboarding them with whatever your business model is and your policies and all those sorts of things, regulations, how you want them to operate, their phone number, all that kind of stuff. But you also need to have somebody there to say, this is an understanding of what the clients that you're going to be dealing with. This is the kind of environment that they operate in. So, for example, if you're a civilian insurance agency and you're dealing with a slip and fall, the person slipped and fell inside the warehouse. That was it. There's nothing else going on. He just slipped and fell.
I'm so sorry, sir. I apologize. And I had mentioned to you personally that I would have to interrupt you. I'm very sorry about this. So sorry. Thank you. Pour 2 minutes 30.
For 2.5 minutes, Ms. Goudreau. Thank you very much, Chair. I understand insurance quite well. I know this industry, and if you have insurance for material damage, it's so different from any kind of human damage. It's a dance in a way. And we're seeing now that we have a program that needs to be human, it needs to be decentralized, it needs to be adaptive. And currently it's not meeting any of those criteria. We're hearing stories like yours. We are hearing you. People have said to us that who have shared these problems, and you are not alone. So for Dr. Saint-Pierre, do you have to sometimes calm veterans and their distress, and if they are concerned they're not hearing back about their file, they come to speak to me in my office even. I talk to them about the direct line, but is this something that's marginalized, or is it quite rare or quite common? That my sessions have to do with calming veterans or regulating? Well, if they know that they're getting a call from the RSS, or they will often be in distress before and after, and if there's a progress report. But if they'd received emails or any other communication from PCVRS, we often have to start over. I try to build trust with veterans, and I try to build their trust in the program as well. I try to differentiate that and state that there are issues with the program, but it's not personal. But yes, I do spend a lot of time on that. So, what veterans are going through, the system doesn't meet their needs. That's correct. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
We'll now have a brief 2 minutes from Mr. Tomey and Mr. Casey. So 2 minutes, Mr. Tomey.
Thank you. We left off, Dr. St. Pierre, that you were saying that it's unethical to break the relationship when someone is going through counseling and then to be moved to a different provider. Could you just kind of unpack that for me? Because I think you had a lot more to say at that point.
Well, it's all about takes so long to build that trust, that therapeutic alliance. And you're dealing with somebody who's fragile. I hate using that term, but you know what I mean by, right? And then you're going to take again away a security from that person, a space where finally he or she could express themselves without fear of being seen as weak or what. And then again, you're going to, take that away from you, and we're going to send you to a stranger. And it should not happen. And I have to say, one of my clients is just transitioned from the forces and into PCVRS, and it was his biggest fear, because I had been working with him for 3 years, and he's like, I don't want to, but I know I'll be forced to. And so I found out...
Biggest fear about that? What was his biggest fear about going to PCVRS? That he was going to lose the relationship with you?
Lose that secure place. He feels good with me. He feels like I get him. We speak the same language. We have built, and we've worked together. I mean, he's grown. He's doing better than he was. And so for him, it was a big fear. But I managed to find out who his VAC case manager was, and we spoke together. And we ensured that this was not going to happen, and it didn't. I still see him.
Okay, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. St. Pierre. Mr. Tomey, thank you. Now, for 2 minutes, Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. North, I'm going to direct my questions to you. If I understood correctly, you started with the rehabilitation program in 2017 with the predecessor to PCVRS. And since 2023, you've conducted 1,908 psychological and mental health assessments. Do I have both those things right?
Correct.
And sometime after January of 1993, you instituted a post-assessment form. Is that right?
In 2024, yes.
Yeah, it would have been after 93 as well, but okay. So yeah. So you instituted this form under PCVRS. Why?
We had an assessor who was threatened in one of her assessments, and she was very concerned, and we were very concerned, and we brought the issue up, and we developed a strategy to make sure that the assessors are safe. But by extension of that endeavor, we also wanted to institute something to make sure that the participants were safe, and that the participants' experience was not too distressing for them, and putting them in a position where a lot of the witnesses to this committee have explained is sometimes the case.
So how long have you been using these post-assessment forms?
For nearly 2 years now.
Have you noticed any trends over those 2 years? Has there been any change in what they've been telling you?
Well, again, there's about 4.5% of the assessments include some concern. So I want to emphasize that 95.5% of
Thank-
the assessments don't.
Thank you. I apologize, sir. I know you cannot see me. I sincerely apologize, Mr. North. So this will be concluding our first round. I would like to say thank you for everyone to have come forward today. Thank you for your service, Colonel Parker, and to all of you. I will be suspending to welcome our next round of questions, of witnesses.
Welcome back. We're going to resume. I would like to welcome our second group of witnesses. As an individual, we have Clea Corman, consultant, collaboration strategies from Corbin Collaboration Strategies.
Clinical psychologist from the Pembroke Psychological Services. Welcome. Alicia. Sorry, I apologize, Madame. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Alicia Hansen. And we also have Monsieur Michael Perstinger, Sergeant retired. Thank you for your service, sir. You will all have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Afterwards, we will proceed to a series of questions with the members of the committee. I will invite Mr. Michael Perstinger to start for 5 minutes.
Good day. My name is Sergeant Retired Michael Persinger. I served in the Canadian Armed Forces Infantry as a primary reservist from 1998 until my medical release in 2021. I deployed to Afghanistan twice and suffer from physical and mental health conditions directly related to those deployments. I served honorably throughout my career and was entrusted with significant responsibilities during my military service. I also hold 2 CEGEP diplomas and a bachelor's degree, and worked successfully as a 3D animator in the gaming industry until my mental health no longer allowed me to continue. Following my release, I spent 2 years stabilizing my mental health through therapy and medication, while also receiving treatment for permanent physical injuries through VAC-supported care. 2 years after my medical release, I entered the PCVRS program. PCVRS spoke constantly about being needs-based, tailored, and built around care and compassion, but almost immediately my therapist refused to work with the program because of previous patient outcomes. That should have been my warning sign. During my time with the program, I was repeatedly forced through redundant assessments for permanent conditions VAC already recognized. Again and again, I was required to justify and relive deeply personal trauma to strangers I would never see again. Instead of rehabilitation, the process often felt like institutionalized re-traumatization. At one point, I was assigned to a rehabilitation clinic located an hour and a half from my home twice a week for treatment for a permanent back injury. Spending 3 hours in a vehicle for back rehabilitation is absurd on its face, yet when I questioned it, I was effectively told that convenience for the contractor network outweighed practicality for the veteran. I was also subjected to additional psychological and vocational testing despite VAC already possessing years of medical and employment records. Throughout the process, I was repeatedly forced to reprove what VAC already knew. After a career of honorable service, I often felt treated with suspicion rather than trust. And throughout all of this, I never had proper access to my own rehabilitation plan through the participant portal. Over the course of the program, that plan was revised 7 times, yet due to an unresolved known IT issue, I never saw it directly myself. On a $500 million contract, that's bureaucratic malpractice, in my opinion. It is equivalent to sending a soldier on patrol without orders, a map, or a compass for that matter. There's also a clear pressure not to resist the process too much. Amongst veterans, there's a widespread fear of being labeled difficult if you push back against the arrangements that don't benefit you. So I go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. Even the professional opinion of my therapist that I was no longer employable because of my mental health condition was effectively overridden by more bureaucracy, more assessments, and more procedural hurdles. Nothing about this process felt individualized. I felt like I was being forced into a pre-existing administrative template. It will always astound me that veterans who were held to the highest standards while in service would accept such mediocrity after their release. By the end of my time with PCRS, I found myself understanding exactly what Franz Kafka warned about. Systems so bureaucratic and perpetuating that the individual trapped inside them becomes secondary to the process itself. Eventually, I found myself asking, why are the folks tasked with helping me actively trying to hurt me? Recently, Prime Minister Carney, speaking in Davos, quoted Thucydides, "The strong do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must." At times, that felt like an accurate description of the relationship between PCRS and myself. Veterans are expected to navigate opaque processes while repeatedly justifying already recognized conditions. After experiencing the program firsthand, I would find it obscene to commit another $500 million to it without major reform. This government has demonstrated over the last year that when there is political will, decisive action is possible. This committee truly believes in the government's stated values of honesty and accountability, then I believe you should honestly recognize that this program is failing veterans and requires fundamental redesign. Because although I am currently sitting at the table throughout this process, I often felt like it was on the menu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perstinger. I would like to now open the floor for 5 minutes to Dr. Henson.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Dr. Alicia Henson, and I'm a clinical psychologist working in Renfrew County, which houses one of Canada's highest concentration of veterans. I'm here to speak to you about PCVRS and the need for stronger accountability, transparency, clinical standard, and independent oversight. These concerns are not new. They reflect years of advocacy by veterans, family members, and experienced clinicians who have raised concerns about how rehabilitation services are designed, delivered, monitored, and evaluated. In 2022, colleagues and I warned about the changes to the contracted rehabilitation model and that it would increase administrative burden, reduce transparency, disrupt therapeutic relationships, and limit veterans' access to experienced community-based clinicians. In 2024, we then approached McGill University to examine these concerns through an independent third-party analysis, which we believe was critical to unbiased research. My colleague Clea Corman will speak more specifically to that project. My focus today will be on strengthening the clinical side of PCVRS, whether the program is grounded in evidence-based trauma-focused treatments, whether veteran competent care and the role of community-based participatory research in the program's design, evaluation, and rehabilitation planning. The brief submitted before this committee reflects evidence from frontline clinicians and veterans, an unpublished manuscript that surveyed 51 mental health clinicians from across Canada, and the outcomes that are now supported by over 150 veterans, clinicians, and community stakeholders. The central concern is this: PCVRS serves veterans with complex service-related rehabilitation needs, yet veterans and clinicians report that the program is not consistently transparent, clinically accountable, or guided by those who understand veteran care. Veteran programming requires clinical judgment informed by operational stress, the relationship between mental and physical health, military and veteran cultural competency, identity disruptions following release, and the readiness for change. Decisions about treatment and rehabilitation readiness must be clinically informed and culturally informed, transparent, and not expressed as threats to essential supports. Yet veterans and clinicians report that some decisions are administratively driven, creating pressure and uncertainty. As previously noted, veterans with trauma histories and systems experienced as unclear or coercive can become a source of distress rather than recovery. This is sanctuary trauma, harm that occurs when systems meant to provide safety become a source of threat, coercion, and a loss of trust, leading to the exacerbation of symptoms. Furthermore, continuity of care is also essential. If a veteran has found a therapist who is safe, effective, and trusted, the veteran should have meaningful choice in maintaining that relationship. Provider changes should be based on clinical need and not administrative convenience or program affiliation. I offer 3 recommendations. First, I applaud the Veterans Affairs Minister call for an independent third-party evaluation. A program of this scale involving public funds and clinically complex veterans should not rely primarily on internal quality assurance by the contractor. The evaluation must include veterans in a meaningful way, along with psychologists and experience in program design and evaluation, and the clinicians who work with the veterans. This must follow the principle of nothing about us without us. Veterans must help shape the evaluation, not simply become subjects of it. Second, Veterans Affairs should establish a national standard for veteran treatment competencies for all mental health deliveries. Basic licensure is not enough. Providers should demonstrate competency in trauma-focused assessments and treatments that are easily identifiable in the literature as among the most effective psychotherapies for PTSD. They should demonstrate cultural competence with veteran and military populations, and at minimum, mental health providers should have 3 years of postgraduate clinically supervised experience with trauma and related evidence-based interventions to work with military and veteran populations. The providers who do not meet that standard, they should have supervision and ongoing continuing education requirements.
Third, VAC programming should require meaningful collaborations with veterans, experienced clinicians, and diagnosing psychologists, and where appropriate, their family members. Unbiased clinicians have the clearest understanding of clinical status, readiness for change, and treatment trajectories. Veterans must also have clear access to their assessments, goals, recommendations, and rehabilitation plans. Veterans should not be forced to work with PCVRS providers if they already have a skilled clinician. However, PCVRS is continuing to force affiliate providers. The issue is not whether Canada is providing veterans with rehabilitation that is safe, transparent, and clinically informed and worthy of service. I sat with veterans and families for over 17 years of service, and I have seen the importance of transparency and safe space. And I have also witnessed culturally competent, evidence-focused therapists walk away from this work because their ethics and values for veterans outweighed the financial benefits. Thank you.
Dr. Henson, and as I mentioned, please look at the chair. I apologize sincerely. Now for 5 minutes, Madame Cormand.
Merci. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Bonjour à tous. My name is Claire Corman. I'm a public policy consultant and a PhD researcher at McGill University, where my research explores how communities and institutions can better collaborate to support at-risk populations. Over the past decade, I have specialized in designing human-centered solutions and driving data-based advocacy for vulnerable groups across multiple sectors, including mental health, education, social pediatrics, employability, and homelessness. Earlier, my colleague, Dr. Henson, spoke powerfully about the severe clinical realities unfolding on the ground. My objective today is to provide the structural roadmap to address some of those realities. The solutions I'm presenting are grounded in a comprehensive 2025 policy report called Veterans First, developed through the McGill Maxwell School of Public Policy, and the policy brief that was submitted in April of 2026 on behalf of over 150 clinicians, veterans, and veteran advocacy groups. To ensure our recommendations reflect the actual needs of the community, our findings synthesize survey data from 51 frontline mental health clinicians and integrate insights from 16 in-depth consultations with stakeholders across the veteran care ecosystem. These are not simply testimonials from outlier cases. This is an ecosystem raising the alarm and suggesting alternatives. We recognize that the federal government has made a substantial $500 million investment to consolidate services under the PCVRS contract. Our goal today is not to advocate for scrapping this program entirely or starting from scratch with a new provider. Instead, we are suggesting viewing the last few years as a pilot phase. Pilots are designed to reveal structural gaps, and this one has clearly shown us where the system is failing our veterans. As we look toward the next iteration of the PCVRS contract, it is time to pivot from basic implementation to meaningful optimization and positive impact on the veteran community. We must treat this as an opportunity to build a system that actually improves the lives and mental health outcomes of veterans and their families. To achieve this, we recommend 3 structural solutions to the next phase of the PCVRS. First, a secure, centralized, and trauma-informed data management system must be implemented. Currently, fragmented data practices are forcing veterans to endlessly repeat their stories and relive their trauma to multiple administrators and clinicians, thus increasing the likeliness of sanctuary trauma. We have a system with excessive access in some areas and complete blind spots in others. The next iteration of PCVRS must mandate the use of a secure platform with strict role-based access controls that protects patient confidentiality while ensuring seamless continuity of care and allowing for different care professionals to work together, not in silos. Second, case management must be standardized and peer support formally integrated. Right now, veterans' postal code and their knowledge of how to work the system too often dictates their level of care. We need a standardized system for assessment and referral across all jurisdictions so that veterans receive timely wraparound services, whether they live in an urban setting or rural, so the veterans, center a remote community. Furthermore, international models in the US, the UK, and Australia have proven that integrating veteran-led peer mentorship into clinical frameworks drastically improves recovery outcomes. Peer mentorship allows for veterans who have already navigated the difficult journey of re-entry into civilian life to help others find their path. A veteran struggling with mental health challenges should not have to go digging for services to connect the dots between service providers and push the system forward. This is the current reality, and it is unrealistic. Canada relies heavily on fragmented grassroots peer support initiatives, and there's currently no list of local resources that case managers can direct patients towards. The next iteration of PCVRS should formally recognize and fund peer support pathways to bridge the gap between clinical treatment and community reintegration. Third, structural transparency and continuous accountability must be established moving forward. We strongly support the call for an independent third-party evaluation, but accountability cannot be a one-off event. The next PCVRS contract must eliminate the conflict of interest inherent in allowing a contractor to evaluate its own efficacy. We recommend establishing an annual independent evaluation framework that includes publicly available performance indicators and a formalized feedback loop with the community it serves. Veterans and clinicians must have a direct, transparent mechanism to report service issues and influence program adaptations as it evolves. I ask the government to consider the following questions. What is the quality of services we are offering our veterans? Is it enough for the sacrifice they have made for our country? Is the support accessible right across the country? Are we proud of our policies? We currently have the data, the clinical expertise, and the international models to get this right. The well-being of our veterans demands that we use this pilot phase of PCVRS as the foundation for immediate and meaningful change. Let us put our veterans first. Thank you for your time. Merci beaucoup. Il me fera plaisir de répondre.
I'll be pleased to respond to your questions in English or French.
Thank you very much. Right on time. So we'll open a round of questions. Mr. Richards, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to Mr. Perstinger and any other veterans in the room today for your service. I want to start with you, Ms. Corman, because you actually asked a good series of questions at the end, and I would argue that the answer to those questions is no, unfortunately. I think that was kind of your take on it as well. And you concluded with, we must put veterans first. And some of the things that we've heard through the course of the study would say that that's not what's happening. Would you agree with that, and why?
Yeah, thank you. Veterans First is also the name of our policy report. Some product placement.
We're actually not allowed to use props, but you can.
I'll take full advantage of that. Yes, I think what we were tasked for at McGill when we reviewed this topic was to see how we could make recommendations to the federal government to improve the mental health outcomes of veterans who are making the difficult transition from service to civilian life. And we've talked, and I listened to some of the previous meetings that this committee has held, as well as sat in earlier to the previous witnesses. We've talked a lot about process and how the process itself is kind of failing our veterans. And they're not, and in my work that I've done in the last decade also, often process takes more space than is necessary, and we forget about the human that's at the center of all of this. So this idea of creating...
Sorry, do you mind if I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Just because
time.
We're limited on time, and I have a couple other things I wanted to ask you about. I think you've given me a pretty good sense there, though. Like it's about process rather than the individual, which is a real problem, obviously. And you also mentioned the idea that there's a obviously an inherent conflict of interest in the fact that you've got a provider that's being told to essentially review themselves and determine whether. And we've heard this data that they and VAC have kind of quoted from, and I wanted to just ask you a little bit about some of that. I guess the importance of, speak just real briefly first to the importance of exit interviews for an organization that's trying to improve a program. Just briefly, just speak to the importance of that for me.
Exit interviews of the people who are like the patients, like the veterans, or exit interview for PCVRS LifeMark as
exit interviews for the veterans.
Yeah.
In this case.
I mean, I liked the previous witness talking about how they do assessments at the end of most of their interviews. I thought that was an interesting thing to implement, and I think that could be something that PCVRS could implement across the board with all of their clinics, ones that are considered in-service providers and out-of-service providers. There is a lack of continuity. I think it's clear, the clinics that are officially affiliated with PCVRS have a different way of operating, which affects care, and it shouldn't be the case. If you're a vet that's being plunked into PCVRS, you should have the same type of care regardless of if you're keeping your current provider or if you're switching to one that's affiliated by PCVRS.
Couldn't agree more with that. Now, the other thing that we've kind of heard that's been an issue with the practices that they have now is the idea that, like we've heard from numerous veterans that that didn't complete the program for various reasons. Like it seems as though they're not being interviewed. Is it how important is it that someone that's not completing the program is interviewed as part of that process to ensure we're getting a proper sample?
Sure, exactly. I mean, I think, again, the witness before had a great system. However, 2,000 veterans are not the entirety of the veteran population. And so I think that, those who are exiting the PCVRS program of their own accord because they're frustrated, because they don't feel like they're being supported, or because they're being removed, like a previous witness was, I think that we're not hearing those stories. We're not hearing those voices, and it's excellent that you're able to hear some of them here today. But I think that there needs to be, again, a third-party evaluator to come in and capture some of these stories, not to nix the whole program, but to implement changes moving forward so that the program evolves with the needs of the veteran community.
Okay, Mr. Perstinger, where are you at currently? Have you completed the rehabilitation program with PCVRS? Are you still in it? Where you? Sorry,
I am free and clear.
You're free and clear. Okay, and were you asked to do an exit interview of any kind?
Actually, the first time I actually saw the face of my RSS was during my exit interview. Everything else was done over the phone, and then finally, the last meeting I had with her was the video conference. So it was a bit of an odd experience.
Might be a bit of a problem in that as well. I would say. I would argue. I'm sure you would too. What's your experience outside of PCVRS been with dealing with Veterans Affairs?
I've been known to be smarter than your average bear. I do have, some schooling and a bachelor's degree, and it's a labyrinth. It became a full-time job for me to sit down and actually read policy and see where I fit into that.
And how have you found the experience with PCVRS? Like, we hear a lot about duplication of bureaucracy essentially between the two. Has that been your experience as well? And does that make it more complex and complicated? And does that lead to sanctuary trauma for yourself or other veterans?
So it's already complex enough to... I guess I'm not answering that.
I'm so sorry, sir. Just say that sentence and that will be it.
It's already complicated enough to navigate the VAC labyrinth, and then to be thrown into the PCRS labyrinth as well as that. It's just duplication of everything.
Thank you very much, sir. I apologize again. Now for 6 minutes, Mrs. Roach.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very, very much for the testimony that we've received so far. I'd like to begin my questions with Sergeant Perstinger, and begin that by saying that my husband served 22 years with the Canadian Forces. He also received a university education during his time, and his longest tour was 14 months in Bosnia. So I have a bit of a sense of what this world is. So thank you for your incredible, extraordinary service to this country. I wanted to ask you, and it sounds like you've been retired from the military for at least 5 years. Yes? What was the thing, like right away, that was missing, that might have made a world of difference right away when you started your transition into retirement?
So I was medically retired because of my physical and mental health issues. I no longer met the bar for the universality service for my trade. Although I had some, I guess, sessions with the VAC representative at Saint Jean, once you're out, VAC isn't calling you to tell you what is available to you. Nobody's calling, in fact. So to then just contact VAC, see what was available to me. There's only so much the portal can do. And then after that, you are basically led to the policy pages. And good luck reading that. I'm sure the people who work at VAC receive training on what the policy means, but, People who aren't in that world, aren't bureaucrats who deal with this every day, it's gobbledygook.
Got it.
Is the best word I can describe.
Oh, merci. If you were to redesign the program, what would be some of the key things that you'd be looking for?
Are we talking about PCRS or BAC?
Well, both, actually.
Basically have a liaison officer, someone who's going to be there to ask any of your questions. The RSS sure is there to book your appointments, to keep up on certain things, but they're certainly not the person I'm going to be like, hey, what exactly is the roadmap here? Right? As I mentioned, I didn't have access to my rehabilitation plan, right? And when I asked about it, the best that she could come up with was sending me screenshots from her computer. Struck me as odd, especially on the largesse of the budget of this program. Having a liaison officer who's just there, like a duty officer in the military, where they're there in like break class in case of emergency. So call them going like, hey, this is happening. What are my options? Right? Even just that, just what are my options? Do I have to say yes to this? Because we don't live in a vacuum. Like veterans talk to each other. There's whole Facebook groups dedicated to this program where horror stories, quite frankly, come out and people are like panicked. Also recognition of the fact that at the same time that I'm going through all this, I'm trying to stabilize my mental health, right? It's not like I'm a regular human being who's completely stable. I'm ramping up on medication. I'm ramping off other medications, trying to find the secret sauce. Now you throw me into this like bureaucratic quagmire that I can barely read. Who's that helping?
Sergeant, and I really appreciate your candor. I'd like to shift to actually Dr. Hansen, Ms. Hansen. So just with that same vein, if you were to redesign the program, what would be some of the best practices that you might cite that are already happening around the world? Because sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. But what would be some of those best practices that you would like to see implemented that are already working very well in other places?
Well, to speak to my own experience, I've been very lucky over time because I have the opportunity to have worked with some veterans as they're releasing from the military. And because, there's so much uncertainty, the more experience and more knowledge you have in working between the different systems, often veterans turn to their clinician to help be a guidepost. And so we are often working from a perspective of just from other experiences with other veterans, but prior to PCRS, we had very skilled back case managers that we had connections with. And we were able to turn to them and help our veterans to navigate this system. And with the onset of PCRS, it was most clinicians that I work with said they were just cut out of the system. And often, I know there has been some opportunity when veterans are coming onto the program for a little bit more communication and collaboration, but I think PCRS, if you're an out-of-network provider, does as much as possible to remove you from the program as the clinician, and often the person who has known the veteran for the longest on the other side of the system. So I think having a little bit like that, understanding truly the working alliance and the importance of that therapeutic relationship, if Veterans Affairs and PCRS could work from that model, I think they would have way better outcomes.
Okay, amazing. I think there's just 15 seconds. Merci.
Thank you very much. Now for 6 minutes, pour 6 minutes, Madame Gaudreau.
Ms. Gaudreau has 6 minutes. Ms. Gaudreau will be asking her questions in French, so please ensure that you are wearing the earpiece if you require interpretation. Ms. Gaudreau, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I hope that you are aware that you have contributed to this study. You are helping this study come to fruition. Earlier, I was talking about a reset, but that would be too easy. There have been cases where things worked. I've heard of such cases at my office, but it's unacceptable to have so many cases that aren't going well. Has this document been shared with the analysts? There is so much information here in the recommendations. Yes, that's great. That's what I was hoping for. We could talk for a year and hear about specific cases, but you did excellent work here. We know that we have to do a complete 180 here in order to offer proper services to veterans. This is political action here. Veterans are listening to us. In the report, you also include the costs and all of the relevant information is in your document. There's also an assessment that needs to be done uphill that's impartial. And you are researchers, and this document is very relevant. My question is as follows. If we were to not listen and to act as though everything is fine, that we move on to something else and perhaps an election, if we don't implement your recommendations, what would happen to our veterans and what would happen to future veterans? That's my question for you. I want to hear from all three of you. Thank you. Veterans are the ones who are going to suffer the most, future veterans as well, if you don't act. The current government is putting more money into defense. The world order is precarious right now. But if we want people to join the army in the future, it would be good to treat them with dignity upon release. There might be other recommendations that come from your study, but this would be a good place to start. I looked at the implementation costs. I know that researchers publish these documents with all our conclusions, but we often forget the implementation aspect, and I did not want to do that. The first step is a formal assessment of the program. And a new program should be assessed in order to ensure that it is well implemented, that it evolves to meet the needs of the community. And I think that would be the first step. Next, if we don't apply or implement, rather, your recommendations, what happens?
Ms. Corman, that it doesn't look attractive for veterans to be not taken care of when we're asking people to step up. I think the other concern that's constantly from a clinical perspective is how many veterans are we losing to suicide and addictions and, you know, various other things where we don't, like from the last project, we don't know how many people we lose. We don't have the data on that. And if we don't include veterans in the program design and evaluation who have been through the program, who are willing to come forward, they're often very, very burned out, but there's a lot of people who really want to be strong advocates for their community, and if we don't take the time to hear their voices and properly implement the changes, we're just going to be making mistakes over and over again and putting this community at risk, and it's not fair.
Pour vous?
I'm here, not for me.
Oh, en français.
Ben, je m'exprime un petit peu mieux en...
I'm a little bit better in English.
I'm here hopefully helping to plant a tree that I will never see the shade of. But if you're looking around the battle spaces of new drone warfare and whatnot, I think that we're going to see mental health numbers go way up in the next conflict that we're going to be encountering. And if the system isn't ready for that, it's going to be a disaster for our community.
Et comme il me reste quelques secondes, je vous pose la question, Monsieur.
I only have a few seconds left, so Mr. Persinger, out of 10, your hope that things will change, and you can speak frankly. Can you tell us the truth? It's the time. It's the time to really state that things need to change.
The institution is gone. It's up to you guys to bring it back for me. I have a 2. Honestly,
au gouvernement d'agir, puis on.
The government needs to act, and we're hoping for changes. That's why we're here.
Inflicted errors, And my time with VAC and PCVRS has eroded my confidence that I will be well taken care of in a timely, especially timely, and simple manner. And so it's up to you to gain my trust back.
Gagner la
I've done my
confiance.
part.
Bon, on vous entend. Puis
We've heard you, and we're going to include that in our report. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
I'll start our second round, and again, we'll go 5-5, 2.5, and 2 and 2. So, Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, and thank you for your service, sir. I was asking the minister just about the purpose of PCVRS, and I'm happy to see that two of you in particular have had dealings kind of on both sides. You just said on the onset of PCVRS, which sounded like it was a disease. I thought that was kind of interesting. But however, what is the problem, or has there been an improvement in something with the onset of PCVRS? Yeah, both of you.
I mean, I only know PCVRS, so I don't know what was there before.
Okay.
So I can't comment on that with an informed comment.
Okay, but you were dealing with a service provider that then you had to leave to go to the PCVRS?
Oh, no, I got to keep my service provider.
Okay.
However, she just refused to work with PCVRS because of other patients. She basically worked with veterans for 20 years at the hospital in St. Anne de Bellevue, and that's how I came by her. And so she had my full confidence. And for her to outright reject working with them, that was a canary in the coal mine for me. I was like, okay, behind the glossy pictures on the website of happy veterans, there might be something else behind this. And I certainly wasn't disappointed in that opinion.
Doctor?
One of the things, I think that the concept of PCRS in centralizing care sounds really wonderful, and I think it's definitely needed, but the way that it's been implemented has not been effective whatsoever. And the very few times that I've been able to work with PCVRS, we're still complete silos. And it's almost like they're pushing that further and further so that they have complete control, and we don't even have relationships with veteran or case managers to even call anymore to communicate with.
So I made the accusation that it just seemed like a raise somebody's stock price scenario rather than trying to help veterans. Now, there's an exclusivity clause in the contract. So my kind of naive thinking about if the government signs a contract with somebody, they sign a contract with an existing business to do an existing thing. But this seems like they signed a contract with kind of a new concept business, and they're building the business off of the money that they got the contract for. Can you explain a little bit about you've kind of watched this grow? Can you explain a little bit about that? And then Ms. Corman as well, if you can comment on that.
So the one thing that, as far as like the research and communication that I've had so far, from what I can tell is that initially the way the program was developed was very much from a physical therapy model. And they just decided with this massive amount of money that they could just add mental health. But they didn't understand the complexities of adding the mental health component. And without the consultation that no one knows who they consulted with, we don't know who actually got to sit at the table and help inform that practice. And so I think it's been, but one of the biggest eye-openers is when they said they had, at the very beginning, all of these clinicians onboarded with them, but then there was never a list, and they were frantically trying to collect us without ever having a lot of success. And I think it continues to be a barrier that they desperately wanted us and didn't expect that we would say no, because our values outweighed the money and the financial benefits that we could potentially have.
Ms. Corman, you got any comments about that?
Yeah, I think the PCVRS, again, had a good idea to have those three distinct facets of somebody's care be united under one umbrella. But they didn't listen to all of the wealth of knowledge that already existed within the veteran ecosystem. And even now, there are alliances, associations who are banging down the doors to PCVRS and to the government saying, hey, we have all of this expertise. Could we share it? Could we collaborate? I think this standing committee did a report in 2023 and flagged a whole bunch of problems with PCVRS. And yet there has been no update since then. And there has been no update from the federal government and also from PCVRS. So for the alliances and the associations and everybody trying to help fix the problem and also serve incredibly vulnerable veterans at the same time, they're left wondering what gives.
Is there any, like, around that, is there any reason why Veterans Affairs can't capture that kind of by themselves? It just seems like to make it so exclusive to PCVRS, like we don't do this in any other kind of industry. So is there a possibility of removing that exclusivity clause out of this?
I think that's a question for LifeMark, for VAC, for PCRS, but I think there's definitely always ways to collaborate with the communities you're trying to serve.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gorman. Good job. Now we will invite Mr. Fanjoy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, and thank you in particular to Sergeant Perstinger. I am glad you're at this table. It's very important that you're at this table. I found myself writing down a number of things that you said. One, I believe, was institutionalized re-traumatization. That struck me because that's the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish here. A foundational principle of bioethics is first do no harm, and so we're failing that, is what I'm hearing. What if we were to start from the beginning? What are the most important elements that you think a veteran needs to get out of a program such as this? In order to successfully transition from active service to retirement and civilian life?
I would say, so I fall under a few Venn diagrams here. I live remotely, and I'm a reservist. So my complexity is multiplied because of the type of my service. I fought next to the regular force guys in Afghanistan, yet when I come home, I fall under a completely different set of rules, regulations, and who I can and cannot seek out for mental health or physical health issues. So that was already a whole process to get my medical release in 2021, and then I got punted over to Veterans Affairs, which I will again reiterate is a very opaque maze that takes a lot of study to try and figure out. And then I got PCVRS. And so, again, there needs to be some kind of, as they mentioned, where I live remotely and I'm being forced to go to in-network clinics because, right? I have a back problem, so spending 3 hours of my day in a car to get to my appointment is ludicrous. It's not helping me. Like, I can go there for an hour and do that, physical therapy or kinesio or what have you, and then drive an hour and a half back and have a stiff back by the time I get home, right? And I had to raise the question, like, why did you do this? And the answer I got was not my department. That's the appointments department, right? And so you can understand that this is frustrating, right? Because as soon as I enter the PCVRS program, I'm in administrative limbo, right? I got out of the military, I got certain conditions pensioned, and now I'm on IRB. And then I'm in PCRS for I don't know how long, having to repeat myself. And all this time, I don't know what my future holds, right? What my financial stability is going to be, any of this stuff, even though all of my medical professionals are like, yeah, no, you're done, right? Tap out, you're done. But I now meet a bunch of strangers that I don't know who ask extremely invasive questions that took my therapist 2 years to pry out of me. And hey, I have to answer this because I don't know what happens when I say no. And if you come from the military, right, if you make too many waves, you get thrown off the boat. So we're coming into this with a culture of, like, don't make too many waves, just go along with it, suck it up, and hopefully you'll get through it. And so I'm sitting in those offices in front of complete strangers for my little interview with them, and I get asked extremely deeply, personal and traumatizing questions, and then my wife has to deal with me for 3 days afterwards when there's a dark cloud over me and I can't get out of bed. So you tell me where we can start over here.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Corman, you've done had a lot of experience in human-centered approaches to complex challenges. I don't think we have a human-centered process here, and that gets to the root of the problem. How do we change that? How do we turn that ship around?
I think, as I've said, the program evaluation is your first step. I think that pivoting a program like this after initial pilot phase is not a fast process. So I think my concern, keeping the human-centered approach in mind, would be in the short term as the program is being evaluated, improved, and rolled out in a different way. I think that putting in place, for example, funding for peer mentorship opportunities so that veterans have an alliance of some kind during the messy waters that may ensue would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Just quickly, if it hasn't been tabled already, could you table veterans first with the committee?
Yeah, so I will share that it's been shared with our clerk, and it's currently going through a translation.
Thank you.
And it will be shared with each of you once we have the translation version. Merci beaucoup. Pour 2 minutes et demie, Madame.
For 2.5 minutes, Ms. Goudreau. I have a question and a comment. Regarding professionals that we were talking about, there are some that are not accepted, even though they have treated veterans. They're not accepted into PCVRS. But for those who are leaving, do you have any information in your report? Is it because of the administrative burden? Is it because of conditions, working conditions? Is it the work model for clinicians? Yes. Often they leave because they know that patients who have had to go through PCVRS haven't had any positive things to say. So they're taking themselves out of that process because on an ethical standpoint, they don't want to be part of the PCVRS process. Some are also not being paid according to their expertise. PCVRS has criteria for clinicians and for those who are managing veterans. So they require a bachelor's in something related to mental health.
Sociology, or maybe bachelor's in psychology with a bit of experience handling very complex trauma that a veteran case would entail. Donc ça c'est comme les deux réserves. Je sais pas if you want.
Those would be my 2 comments.
Clinicians leave or don't participate in PCVRS.
As I said before, a lot of it has to do with the ethics of it. When the initial documents came out, when they were looking for clinicians, they really handpicked who they would reach out to, and they got a lot of pushback.
Mon commentaire, parce que sachez que je...
Know that I am very frustrated. I'm a parliamentarian, and I am here to represent my people. I'm not searching for power. And we are looking at an opportunity to make major changes. And it's not because we have a lack of compassion. You can ask the question to all parliamentarians. Everyone will say that there's a problem. There's willful blindness here. We're talking about political will. And we need to keep hearing these comments. Yes, there's a minister, but there's also a prime minister, and people need to wake up to these issues. And it's thanks to testimonies like yours that we can move forward, and you are very courageous. And thank you so much for participating in this study. Thank you, Ms. Goudreau.
Je vais maintenant donner la...
I will now give the floor.
Ending with the 2 minutes from our Conservative and our Liberal. For 2 minutes, Mr. Richards.
Let me, I guess a couple things I wanted to touch on if we can. Mr. Perstinger, you've already touched on this a little bit, but the idea of the fact that you live more remotely, and that's led to, like you mentioned, your issue with the appointments for your back. I can certainly understand how that would just be counterproductive, essentially. We've heard that from other veterans as well. You said you're on Facebook groups with other veterans and things like that. Is this a pretty common story? this issue that you're dealing with, where because you're living further from a major center, you're being required to go places that make no sense?
I can't speak to hundreds versus hundreds. These aren't exactly huge Facebook groups, but it is a theme. I had to fight back to get it moved to something closer, and this isn't in emails or anything, but when they called me to tell me that they found a new clinic for me that was only half an hour away, the tone on the phone was very much like they were doing me a favor. And again, it's just frustration, right? It's like, why? I'm here doing a thing that I didn't ask for, and now I'm being shoved through this, even though I know it's not going to fix my back. My back problem is permanent. For whose benefit?
So essentially, I think what I hear you're saying is that there just is a lack of common sense being applied here. Is that accurate?
Bingo.
Okay. Maybe to Dr. Henson or Ms. Corman, you just want to speak to sanctuary trauma and the constant retelling of the veteran's story to be able to get the help and what that does to them?
I think in a very, very simple way of saying it is just it exacerbates the symptoms. You know, when they're telling their story over and over again, when they've just released and completed an assessment with a psychologist, and then the assessment gets sent to VAC, and then PCVRS picks it up, and they never even look at the assessment, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just re-traumatizing and asking for way too much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henson. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Madame Auguste va poser les questions en français, so please make...
We'll be asking her questions in French, so please ensure that you have your earpieces on. Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for Ms. Corman, and I know I don't have a lot of time. If I understood correctly, your report does not seek to overhaul PCVRS entirely, but rather to see potential improvements. Can you talk about the systemic issues that are leading to the problems that are being faced by the veterans? There are things that were raised by Mr. Hirstinger. There's a lot of work done in silos. There's a lack of collaboration, communication between PCVRS, clinicians, case managers. There are too many people who are dealing with one person, but they're not sharing any information. That's why one of our recommendations is to create a database that can manage all of that information. People today have said that they don't have access to their own support plans. That's ridiculous. And we can meet that need. We can implement measures that would give opportunities to those who are working with PCVRS to work together. They can share best practices. They can share information between clinicians and caseworkers.
Keep the human in the middle and figure out how to implement big policy. Sorry, I'm switching to English for a second, but the government had a great idea. PCRS had a great idea. They put a lot of energy into this great idea. They didn't put as much energy into how to implement it. And so now we have to shift focus to how to implement and how to improve and how to break down some of those silos. And it's very doable. It's not crazy.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Auguste.
Thank you, Ms. Auguste. This concludes the second round.
J'aimerais juste vous demander, est-ce que vous avez...
Ms. Corman, do you have a French version of your report that you could share with us? If not, we'll send it to translation, or we have sent it to translation, but just to see whether or not... No, we do not have a French version. I can translate it myself, but I think you might be faster than I am. Thank you. Just wanted to ensure that you didn't already have one.
To see if their version is closer to being done than yours.
So I would encourage you, I would encourage you maybe to reach out to work to verify, and we'll make sure that either through our translation or if it's already being produced by McGill University, that we can share with our member of our committee.
I'll also submit a brief this week summarizing in English and in French the report. So if anyone doesn't have time to read the full report, there'll be a brief version.
nos membres vont apprécier. Écoutez, je voudrais vous remercier.
Thank you.
Our witnesses for this to have been here with us. And again, Mr. Perstinger, and I apologize, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your service. Merci pour vos services.
Thank you for your service. Our next meeting is on Monday, June 1st. For the first hour, we will be hearing witnesses on PCVRS, and the second hour, we will have witnesses on the study of Black veterans and their experience. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Meeting adjourned.